What's up guys, Jack here with MTS, and this is the 2022 Complete UniFi Setup Guide. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Ubiquiti, they use something called software-defined networking, or SDN. And for the sake of simplicity, that basically just means that we have a central controller that manages all of our devices to create a simple management interface for all of our networking equipment, which provides a single pane, a single place for you to change all of your settings. Things get synced across devices, port profiles get synced, VLANs, everything. It just makes management much easier. Now, at the heart of any UniFi network is the controller, and for the controller you have a number of options. You can self-host the controller on any PC, Mac, or Linux computer. Ubiquiti makes the software freely available for download. You can also use one of their hardware appliances, such as the CloudKey Gen 2 or the CloudKey Gen 2 Plus at $179 and $199 respectively. But we're going to be using a Dream Machine Pro SE, which handles a number of these functions for us, including our controller. The second thing we have in pretty much any network is a router, or what is taking those packets, those bits of information, and sending them where they need to go. What is giving each device its address so that way things know how to communicate. Again, that's being handled by our Dream Machine Pro SE here. The third thing that we're going to need is a switch, or what's going to be sending our network signals to all of our devices. That again, handled by our Dream Machine Pro SE. And that also includes 4 PoE ports. Now, PoE is power over Ethernet, which basically just means that you can have power and data running over a single cable. So when I go to plug in an access point, I don't need to run 2 separate cables. I can run it all over one cable. If you don't have a PoE switch, you can use something called a Poe Injector, which basically just takes a regular network signal, injects power into it, and then gives it to you on a cable, so that way you don't have to have a PoE switch. I would recommend heavily having a PoE switch because managing PoE injectors just becomes a pain in the butt when you get more than 2. Now, one of the nice things about having a PoE switch is that you can remotely reboot devices. If a device isn't behaving or isn't responding to your commands, you can go into the controller software, select the port on the switch, and hit reboot or cycle PoE. What that does is it will kill the PoE power on that port and then re-enable it, effectively power cycling these devices without you having to go down to your mechanical room and fumbling around with all of your cables going, oh, I think this is the right PoE, unplug this. It just makes things so much easier. Again, that is being taken care of by our Dream Machine Pro SE. Now, along with our UDM Pro SE's built-in switch, I'm also going to be setting up a 5-port little desktop switch from Ubiquiti, the USW Flex Mini. Now, this is a little 5-port gigabit managed switch that gets its power either via the included USB-C power adapter or through PoE on the first port from our Dream Machine or any other PoE switch that we have. Now, the fourth thing that we're going to need is some form of access point, which takes our wired network signal and converts it into Wi-Fi for all of our devices, such as phones, tablets, laptops, little Nintendo Switches, XYZ, to all connect to. And for that, I'm going to be using a U6 Lite and a U6 Professional. Now, because our Dream Machine Pro SE has an NVR, or network video recorder, built into it, I'm going to be setting up a couple little security cameras from UniFi's Protect lineup. The first one being a G3 Flex. This is a little 1080p camera that just gets its power from PoE, and a G3 Instant, which gets power from the included USB-C wall adapter, but you can also get an 802.3AF PoE adapter for it as well. But this is a Wi-Fi only camera. It will not send its data over the network cable. It will only get power from it. But again, I'm just going to be using the included USB-C wall adapter. Now, you don't have to go with all of the gear that I have here. You could swap out these security cameras for whatever best fits your needs. Say you need a nice bullet camera right above your garage or at like the main entrance to your office building. Well, you can substitute one of these cameras for the G4 Bullet or really anything else from Ubiquiti's lineup. Need more switch ports? Just add a different switch in. The adoption process is the same, the configuration process is the same for all of these devices, so mix and match as your needs see fit. Now, along with swapping swapping out or adding additional cameras and switches, you can do the same thing with your access points. Ubiquiti has a number of access points for just about any use case. Need some outdoor Wi-Fi? Well, go with their Mesh Pro series or their regular Mesh outdoor access points. You can also use their Pro access points, the U6 Professional or the APAC Pro, outdoors, so long as it's not directly being rained on and you have the rubber stoppers in place. Now, the Dream Machine Pro and Dream Machine Pro SE vary in three main ways. The first being that the Pro SE, 4 of the front panel gigabit ports are PoE, so that way you can power up devices such as access points and security cameras without needing an external PoE switch. The second being that the RJ45 WAN port on the Pro SE is 2.5 gigabit rather than just gigabit on the regular UDM Pro. The third difference being that the UDM Pro SE has 128 gigs of internal storage that you can use for UniFi Protect recordings, versus the Dream Machine Pro requiring a hard drive in order to do recordings. Now, I would recommend on a Pro SE also using a hard drive because 128 gigs gets filled up very quickly as soon as you start dealing with high resolution security cameras. I happen to have the Pro here, but through some movie magic, we're gonna pretend like this is the Pro SE. But with that being said, let's go ahead and get everything connected and jump into the controller setup. So the first thing that we're gonna do is get everything cabled up and connected. Now, this is where we run into the first difference between my setup and your setup, and that's gonna be how does your internet service provider, or ISP, hand off your internet connection to you? Most commonly, that will be done over just a standard RJ45 cable. And if so, you can just plug that right into the front port on the Dream Machine Pro or Pro SE. But in some cases, you might have your internet connection handed off to you over fiber. This is generally going to be done if you have a faster than 1 gigabit internet connection. I only have a gigabit internet connection, but again, for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to be using the SFP port, and that's going to be plugged in right up here. And we can tell by the little indicator light right here that we are getting network activity. We also don't have the Dream Machine telling us, please connect to the internet. The next thing that I'm gonna do is plug in all of these devices. So I'm just gonna grab some network cables right here, plug them into the first 4 ports on our Dream Machine. And we can see the lights on the devices as they're booting up. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and connect the G3 Instant last because this camera has a really annoying chime that it plays anytime it's not adopted to a controller. So just to save my ears, I'm gonna plug this in last. But now that we have everything all cabled up, we can jump into the initial configuration of our Dream Machine Pro, getting that online, getting our devices adopted, before we then move over to the computer for the more advanced configuration. Now, I've jumped into the UniFi controller app here on my phone, and we can see that it's found our Dream Machine Pro. Again, I'm simulating that this is an SE, but in reality, this is a Dream Machine Pro. So I'm gonna click on Setup. It's gonna connect to the device, and then we're gonna be prompted to enter our UniFi account. Just a quick little side note, whenever you first adopt whatever UniFi OS console you're running, one of the first things it'll have you do is sign into your Ubiquiti single sign-on account, or SSO account. Now, what that'll do is tie your Dream Machine cloud key or anything like that to your Ubiquiti account and allow you to use their remote cloud access to it. Now, I'm already signed into the mobile app, which is why it didn't ask me to do that. However, your mileage may vary. We're gonna name the device. I'm just gonna call this, last year I called this Goodbye 2020. I'm gonna say Hope for the Future. That's just what I'm gonna call this, and I'm gonna disable analytics and improvements. Next, it's gonna test our internet connection speed to see what our ISP is capable of giving us. Again, I have a symmetric gigabit fiber line, so we should be seeing anywhere between 900 to 1,000 megabits per second. Now, that speed test was a little bit slow. I have a feeling it was just a fluke with this speed test that this guy just ran. I'm gonna go ahead and run another one once we get into the advanced configuration options using the computer. But for now, I'm just gonna let this device finish updating. Okay, so a bit of an odd thing happened. I updated the Dream Machine Pro SE here, well, this is just the Pro, and all of a sudden my SFP module stopped working with it. Now, I can go ahead and fall back to using RJ45, but not exactly a good sign. Now, this is pretty common in the industry for different manufacturers to have different standards that they use for SFP plus stuff. So if you run into this issue, maybe make sure you get the Ubiquiti specific SFP plus modules. For now, I'm gonna go ahead and swap out my fiber connection to the internet with RJ45. Now that I've swapped out my fiber connection for RJ45, I have a connection to the Dream Machine Pro SE here through the mobile app. Now, RJ45 is generally much less of a headache to deal with than fiber and SFP because different manufacturers have different intercompatibility options for SFP rather than RJ45, which is pretty much just a common standard, plug it in and it's gonna work. So now that we have a connection to the app, we're gonna go ahead and adopt our devices. We can see that we have the U6 Pro here ready for adoption. I'm gonna hit adopt device. We have our U6 Lite, and I'm gonna hit adopt device, and our USW Flex Mini is missing from the list. I'm gonna go ahead and try and figure out why that is. Okay, so our USW Flex Mini just popped up on the list. I just gave it the old unplug it and plug it back in, and it seems to be working. So we're gonna go ahead and adopt this as well. Now with all of our devices adopted, I'm gonna go into our UDM Pro SE here, hope for the future, and scroll down to see its LAN IP address, 192.168.0.1. And that's the IP address that we're gonna use to manage the UDM Pro SE. So I'm gonna go ahead and take that address, plug it into my web browser on my desktop so we can manage the advanced settings of all of these devices to get our network really configured and dialed into the way we want it. Now that we're at the computer, we can dive into the advanced configurations of our UniFi controller. Now, this website that I'm at right now is unifi.ui.com, which will show you a list of all of your UniFi OS consoles. That's all your cloud keys if they're up to date, and your UniFi Dream machines. However, if you are running the self-hosted version of the UniFi controller, you're going to want to either go to the controller's IP address, or you're going to want to go to networks.unifi.ui.com. And I'll have all these links down in the description. However, if you have plugged your computer directly into the Dream Machine Pro, I would recommend going to the IP address of it. And that's that IP address that we found earlier, 192.168.0.1. However, for this, I'm just going to be using unifi.ui.com because my computer's on a different network. So we can go ahead and get into our hope for the future. I'm just going to click on network. And we're brought to the dashboard page of our UniFi Dream Machine. Now we can see the 4 ports we have populated right here with all of our devices, as well as our internet connection right here on the RJ45 port, which is pretty nice about the new GUI. It'll show you exactly which port things are plugged into. But we can come down here and go to our UniFi devices. So this is all of our access points, switches, cameras, all that stuff. And I'm going to go ahead and start renaming our devices so that way they have more of a friendly name. So the U6 Pro, this is going to go in the living room. So I'm going to call this living room access point. Cool. Hit apply. U6 Lite, settings, device name. I'm going to call this garage because this is going to go in the garage. Scroll down and hit apply changes. And the USW Flex Mini, I'm going to put this behind my TV. So I'm going to go over to settings and rename it to TV switch. Now that we've given more of a friendly name to all of our devices, we can go in and start configuring our networks. And we're going to be creating a couple of VLANs. Now, if you're not familiar with a VLAN, it's essentially a separate network from your main network with selective communication between the two, or multiple. You can have like 4,000 plus VLANs. It's crazy. But so the reason why we would use something like a VLAN is 1, for security, and 2, for congestion. Now, network devices are pretty chatty. They like talking to each other. Hey, do you have this IP address? Yes, I do have this IP address. Hey, who's the router? I'm the router. Things like that. And that's normally not a problem on a home network. However, if you're deploying something like Ubiquiti or UniFi, it's probably because you have more devices or are in need of more than what a simple ISP router can provide to you. So we're going to try and deal with that congestion. Now, congestion on a network is not linear. It does not linearly increase as you add more devices. It actually increases exponentially because all of the devices like talking to each other as well. So we're going to use some VLANs just to simplify our lives a little bit. So we're going to go into settings, and it wants us to create a Wi-Fi network first. However, we're not going to do that just yet. We're going to go over to networks. and create a new network. And I'm going to call this our IoT network, or Internet of Things. So this is where all of our little smart plugs, smart TVs, those things, the things that are generally less secure than something like a desktop or a phone. If you've seen all like the big Chromecast hacks or printer hacks, those types of things, this is making sure that if one of those devices gets compromised, it doesn't have access to the rest of our network, where our computers, phones, tablets, those types of things are. So I'm just going to call this IoT. We're going to disable auto scale the network, and I'm going to change this IP range from 192.168.107.1 with a net mask of 24. That's going to give us 254 usable IP addresses, or 253. Then we're going to come down to advanced configuration and click on manual and VLAN ID. Now I'm going to change this VLAN ID to 107 just because that's the IoT standard VLAN ID that you use, and we're going to want to make sure that MDNS is enabled, or multicast DNS. Now what this is going to do is allow the devices that are on our main network to discover the devices that are on the IoT network, which is important for things like Apple TVs and Chromecasts, because if the device was on just a completely separate network, we wouldn't have the ability to cast from our phone or our tablet to the TV. Enabling MDNS, or multicast DNS, allows that communication to work. So we're going to go ahead and leave that enabled. And I'm going to click on Add Network. All right, our IoT network's been created. The next thing that we're going to do is create a guest network for any guests that come over to my house. Now, if a guest comes over and they have a virus on their laptop, I don't want that to be able to jump onto the devices on my network. So we want to make sure that that is segregated from my network. I want the guests' devices to be their own thing. All they need is internet access. They're not going to have the ability to control my Chromecasts. They're not going to have the ability to talk to anybody else on the network. They are just getting the internet. So we're going to go ahead and create a new network. I'm just going to call this guestnet. I'm going to disable auto scale network, and I'm going to change this network to a .10. So we're at 192.168.10.1. Then I'm going to come down to manual. I'm going to change this VLAN ID to 10. I generally try and have my VLAN ID be the same as whatever this is. And so we're also going to apply guest policies by creating a guest network. Now, what guest policies do is it basically tells the devices, hey, you're alone. You can't see out to any other devices on the network. The only thing you can see is the internet. So say I have Billy's iPhone and Jimmy's tablet. Those two devices can't talk to each other even though they're on the same network, which is exactly what we want for a guest network. I'm also going to disable MDNS because I don't want them to have communication with my Chromecasts or anything like that. Everything else looks good. I'm going to go ahead and click on Add Network. Now we're going to go ahead and create one more network. We're going to create a network for our cameras. Now, because these cameras are going to be outside, that's an outside Ethernet connection. That's the ability for somebody to tap into that camera line and get access to our full network. And we don't want that. We want the cameras to really only be talking to the NVR or the Dream Machine. So we're going to set up a VLAN for our cameras. I'm going to go ahead and create new network. We're going to call this cameras. Disable auto scale the network. We'll just set this to 2. Actually, I'll change this to 20. Come down to manual here, change this to VLAN ID 20, and disable MDNS, and we're good to go. Now that we have all of our networks set up, it's time to create our SSIDs, or Wi-Fi networks that go along with all of our wired networks. So I'm going to go over to Wi-Fi, and by default, it's putting us on the LAN network. And so this is going to be the network, or the Wi-Fi network, that all of my devices are going to connect to. That's going to be on our main LAN. I'm going to go ahead and call it MTS. And for password, I'm just going to go with password. And all of the other settings actually are pretty good right out of the box. So I'm not going to bother changing any of these. I'm just going to click Add Wi-Fi Network. Next, we're going to create our IoT Wi-Fi network for all of our little smart plugs, Chromecasts, smart TVs, whatever's to connect to. Create Wi-Fi network. I'm going to call this MTS_IoT. And for password, I'm going to go with, again, password, but password IoT. Just again for testing, don't make your password something like this. And for network, we're going to select IoT. Now, what this network setting does is it means that any device that we connect to our IoT Wi-Fi network is going to get dumped onto our IoT network, the actual back-end network. And so I'm going to change these settings here a little bit. I'm going to go to manual and I'm going to disable 5 gigahertz. I've had issues with smart devices in the past not having the ability to see a combined SSID. So a combined SSID is when you have your 2.4 gigahertz and your 5 gigahertz names the same. So they appear to your devices as just one network. However, I've had some issues with smart devices not liking that if they can't actually connect to 5 gigahertz. So I generally make IoT networks 2.4 gigahertz only. And all these other settings look good. I'm going to go ahead and click on Add Wi-Fi Network. And for guest Wi-Fi, MTS, guest. And I'm just going to make the password welcome guest. And so I'm going to put them on the guest network or guest net, and all of these settings look good. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Add Wi-Fi Network. And just like that, we have all of our main networks and Wi-Fi networks set up. However, our IoT network and our main network can still communicate. We haven't told them that they can't. Now, on most networking equipment, the default rule is to block traffic or have no rule set up at all. Except for with Ubiquiti, their default policy is to allow traffic between all VLANs, so we need to tell it to not do that. So we're going to go ahead and come into Firewall and Security, Firewall Rules, LAN. We're going to click on Add. We're going to say LAN in, description, block IoT from LAN. We're going to click on Reject or Drop all traffic from the network IoT to the destination network LAN. And that should be it. Save changes. Now we're going to create one more rule. That's just going to be a block LAN from IoT. Drop all packets from network LAN to destination network IoT. And apply changes. And last but not least, we need to create the firewall rules for the camera network so that way it can't talk to any other network. So we're going to create new rule, LAN in, block cameras from LAN. We're going to click on drop, network cameras to network LAN. And hit apply. And we have to do the same thing for our IoT network as well. So LAN in, block cameras from IoT, drop network IoT or cameras from network IoT. And that should be all of our LAN rules that we need. Now, we just blocked all traffic from our IoT network and our LAN network, so they can't talk to each other at all, except for with MDNS. Now, there is some traffic that I want to allow through. I have a Plex server set up on my main network, and I want devices on my IoT network, specifically my Apple TVs, to be able to see my Plex server. So if you know the port, I do, it's 32400, that's the default port Plex uses. If you don't know what port your application uses, generally a simple Google search will be able to tell you. So the little Casa Smart Wi-Fi plugs, they use port 9999. Plex uses 32400, and Minecraft servers generally are on 25565. A Unify controller, for instance, is on port 8443 and port 8080. So if you know the ports, you can have the networks communicate. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the IoT network to be able to see my Plex server. With that, I'm going to do create new port and IP group. And I'm just going to call this port and IP group Plex, and I'm going to plug in the details of 32400. So I'm going to go ahead and put in Plex and 32400. Click on Add and hit Apply Changes. Now, if we come over to Profiles, we can see we have our Plex port and count 1. So to apply this rule to our IoT network, we're going to go ahead and create new rule. I'm going to change this to LAN in. Description, allow Plex on IoT. Before predefined rules, and our source, The source is where the traffic is coming from, or what network is making the request. Because our IoT network is going to be making the request, we need to change this to network IoT. And we're going to allow the destination to be port group, Plex. So this is going to make sure that any device on our IoT network will be able to connect to our Plex server on our main network, but nothing else. And we're going to hit apply changes. Now that we have all of our firewall rules set up, we need to go ahead and change the priority of them. Ubiquiti works based off of highest takes priority, meaning that the higher you are in the list of firewall rules, the more priority you have. Therefore, because we have our block rules above the allow rules, everything's going to get blocked on our IoT and LAN network before Plex is ever allowed to go through. And we don't want that to happen. So what we need to do is move this allow Plex on IoT to be above these other rules. And we can do that by just grabbing it over here on the side and dragging it up to the top. Now that should be all of our firewall rules out of the way, except for right now we're not taking advantage of one of the UDM Pro's key features, and that is the traffic threat management. So we're going to come up here to threat management and select detect and block. Hit apply. One of the things that I forgot to mention is that you're going to want to change the system sensitivity for the threat management. They have 3 built-in profiles, low, medium, and high, as well as custom, where you can manually edit the threat categories, such as blocking Trojans, DNS, user agents, web servers, ICMP, FTP, really whatever you can think of. And we're done. We now have a completely managed and set up UniFi network that should be up and running. So with that being said, let's do a test. I'm going to run a speed test on my desktop here just to see what we're getting on our wired network. Ping of 1 millisecond. I have a symmetric gigabit fiber line coming to my house, so we can see we're getting about 900 meg down, and let's see what our upload is. And we're getting very similar numbers on our upload. Coming into the Wi-Fi settings on my phone, we can see our networks, MTS, MTS Guest, and MTS IoT. I'm going to click on MTS, type in the password, which is just password. So I've gone ahead and connected to our MTS network, and I'm just going to click on Go. Now, I am running an iPhone 10, so I'm not able to fully take advantage of our Wi-Fi 6 access points, but still, 213 down plus 100, 200 something up, more than good enough for a phone. Now that we've made sure our Wi-Fi is working, I'm going to go ahead and get to setting up some Vlan profiles on our switch. Now, if we come over to devices, you remember that I have this TV switch. Now, my goal with the little 5-port Flex Mini switch is to put it behind my TV and have 1 port be the uplink and 3 ports that are on the IoT network for my TV, soundbar, and PlayStation. And then I want to have that 5th port be on my main LAN for setting up something like an HTPC whenever I do VR out in the living room. So I'm going to come into our switch settings and go over to settings, ports, and I'm going to select port 2, and we're going to put it on IoT and hit apply changes. I'm going to do the same thing with port 3, IoT, apply changes, ports, IoT, and apply changes. And then for the last one, I'm going to make sure this is on my LAN. Apply changes. And just like that, I now have all of the devices that will automatically be put on the IoT network as soon as they get plugged in. Now that we've changed all the port settings on our TV switch, it's time to do the same thing for our security cameras. If you remember, we plugged in that little G3 Flex camera earlier, and now that we have our own dedicated camera network, we need to make sure that that camera goes on the camera network. So because it's plugged directly into our UDM Pro SE, I'm going to come up to Hope for the Future, settings, ports, the first port. The Flex camera is only 10100, so it's very easily identifiable right here as this 100 megabit connection. I'm going to change the port profile to cameras and hit apply changes. Now that we have all of our network settings fully configured, it's time to set up UniFi Protect. So we're going to come up to Hope for the Future, our little biscuit up here, and we're going to select UniFi Protect. And this is the Protect dashboard. We don't see all the little ports populated in this dashboard, but you can see the camera little stills of when it's detected motion. I have the camera right behind me over here. So we're going to come over to Devices, and we can see our little G3 Flex. And we can open up a little live view of it. Now let's change our UDM Protect settings so that way it's something that makes sense, because by default, Ubiquiti doesn't have any information on this camera. It just shows the Ubiquiti logo or UDM logo, which kind of stupid. So we're going to come over here to recording and recording quality. Max everything out, 25 FPS, better image quality. If you're using a lot of security cameras in a business environment, you could probably drop this down to about 10 FPS, but because I only have a handful of cameras and a 1 terabyte hard drive, I'm just going to crank the settings on everything. So image quality, 100%, frame rate, 25 FPS, and I'm going to tell it to always record. By default, it records on detections, but I prefer it to just always record and then alert me about detections. So all these settings look good. You can set up privacy zones. So if there's something that you can't film, say you have a camera outside and you don't want to film like the house across the street or the business across the street, or especially like a highway, if your camera like faces a road, you don't want to be triggering motion detections by all the cars just driving by. So you can set up a privacy zone, and that is essentially a little mask where the camera will not record. It will basically just black it out. However, I don't need a mask, so I'm just discard the changes. The next thing that we're going to do is change our overlay settings, because this UDM logo here is not very useful. So under settings, we're going to change our overlay information, disable the logo because that's stupid, enable the camera name and time because that's actually useful information, and hit apply changes. I'm also going to disable the status light. I don't like having status lights on my cameras because say it's an area that gets a lot of foot traffic. If somebody wants to rob me, well, they see the light on the camera all the time. And then the one day that the light is off on the camera, hey, it's probably down. So good opportunity. So I don't like to give out any more information than I have to with my cameras. So the status light gets turned off. You also have the ability to disable the microphone permanently. Now, disabling the microphone permanently will deactivate the microphone, but in order to reactivate it, you will have to manually reset the camera. That is, going up to it and holding the reset button if you want to get that microphone back on. Now, this is done generally for one reason, and that is some jurisdictions do not allow for recording of audio in security cameras because it violates people's privacy. So make sure you're just kind of up to speed on the laws of security cameras in your area. And I'm also going to go ahead and rename this G3 Flex to bedroom, because this is just going to be a camera that's going to keep an eye on who comes in and out of my bedroom. The bathroom in my bedroom of this apartment is actually the bathroom that you're expected to use if you're just like a guest coming over. So I want to make sure people don't walk down my little hallway into my room. They're just using the bathroom. So I'm going to keep this here in my bedroom. Now that we have our G3 Flex set up, let's go ahead and set up our little G3 Instant. Now our G3 Instant is a little Wi-Fi camera, and it's just going to go on our main Wi-Fi network. I could put it on the IoT network if I wanted, but I'm just going to put it on the main LAN. I don't have a problem doing this, and I don't have a problem with it not being on its own VLAN because it's a wireless device. People aren't going to be able to use that camera to easily jack in their laptop, to my cameras and get access to my whole network. So with that being a Wi-Fi camera, likely inside my home, it's fine to just be on the main network. Now I've gone ahead and plugged in my little G3 Instant camera, and pretty soon it's going to boot up, and you'll get to hear the, yeah, this doesn't go away. But we can see our web page here has already found the G3 Instant. So I'm going to go ahead and click on it and hit Adopt Device. And hopefully it'll shut up. All right, now that our little G3 Instant has been updated, we're going to go ahead and change the settings on it as well. So recording, again, always recording quality, image quality, 100%. Motion detection settings, I want 1 second of motion to be required in order to count it as motion. We're going to tell it to record 10 seconds before, 10 seconds after, and apply changes. We're also going to come over here to our settings, disable the status light, and change our overlay information. I'm going to call this living room, and hit apply changes. Now I forgot to change our motion settings on the G3 Flex camera, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Go to bedroom, recording, motion detection settings, 1 and 10 and 10. Apply changes. Now this really doesn't matter because I am recording all the time. However, if you have a number of cameras, you might want to conserve disk space and not record 24/7. So then these settings become very important. So that way you make sure you get, the person driving up, make sure you get the person, after they've walked by the camera, just recording. And just like that, UDM Protect is set up. We have a camera system and a network system, all ready to go. And now that we have everything set up, we can manage our network and view our recordings remotely using the UDM Network and Protect apps on our phone, or by using unify.ui.com, as well as the host name of the controller. But anyway, guys, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and drop a like. If you really liked it, want to see more of me in your subscription feed, then you can go ahead and get subscribed. I'll have links down in the description to all the products that I talked about in this video, as well as the tools and cabling that I use when I'm doing these jobs and these installations. While you're down there, go ahead and drop a comment. Let me know what you thought about this guide. Is there anything I could have included, or what would you have done differently? After watching this, if you found any of this to be a little bit too daunting for you, I do offer network consulting, as well as full remote configuration. You can visit my website, millermediastl.com, and click on the Get Started button. But anyway, guys, thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one.